Today on DeKoder, we're joined by Mr. Anish Malpani, CEO and founder of Without. Without is a social enterprise that focuses on transforming unrecyclable plastic waste, such as chocolate wrappers and chips packets, along with worn and discarded textiles, into high-end quality products. Thank you so much for being with us today. To start, I would like to ask you to tell us a little bit about Without. I know you guys talk a lot about two different aspects of your company. One is, of course, turning waste into consumer products, but you also do a lot of social upliftment work. So could you tell us a little bit about these two aspects?
Awesome. First of all, thank you for having me. At Without, we, as you said, transform unrecyclable plastic waste like chips, packets, chocolate wrappers into engineering grade materials like for eyewear, for automotives, and even like things like bottles, like shampoo bottles. We made the world's first recycled sunglasses from packets of chips. And we've also made the world's first shampoo bottle from shampoo sachets, which are a big problem in the waste space. And I think, the waste management space, especially in countries like India, is so much more than just an environmental issue. There are close to 4 million informal poor who survive on waste picking. And we think that when you're working in the waste space, you have to incorporate them into solving the problem as well. We formalize these former waste workers out of waste picking into dignified work, where they are no longer waste workers. They are machine operators, quality control specialists, and based on their potential, they can go as far as they would like, just like you and I. So not only are we working with the hardest waste, but we're also upskilling and graduating former waste workers or former informal poor out of poverty as well simultaneously. I think we're probably the only idiots in the world doing deep chemical engineering, deep tech, and deep social impact, deep social inclusion. But I think this is the way you reform capitalism and in some way reform the way organizations are. And we want to be that template that you can be ethical and you can use profit to maximize the impact on people and the planet, and not vice versa. Our goal is not to maximize profit. Our goal is to maximize impact.
Yeah, I actually, when I was researching about Without, I saw you talking about this in a video where you said you want to change what capitalism means in today's world, and no longer should it be only about profit. So what does that mean exactly? An individual can only be responsible, in my understanding, more or less, in terms of what they're buying. Can individual action really fix things if the real problem lies with the companies that are actually manufacturing and producing these goods?
That's a good question. I don't necessarily think that reforming capitalism is an individual ask. I think it is us as a society. Can we rethink how systems are built? But first, I want to kind of be appreciate capitalism, right? We can't. You can't just be like capitalism is bad, because we wouldn't be able to have this conversation if there wasn't capitalism. We wouldn't be able to enjoy some of the luxuries we have today. The unfortunate thing about the current form of capitalism is that it's coming at the cost of the planet and at the cost of the poor, who seem to be sometimes exploited to get to this. But I don't think that fundamentally it's only created bad. It's also created some good. So for me, the next step is that how do you take a system like capitalism and make it better? How do you make it so that, okay, it doesn't hurt the planet, it doesn't hurt the people, while we're still creating wealth and abundance, but not at the expense of the planet or the expense of the other people, right? And I think one of my inspirations, Michael Braungart and William McDonough wrote this book called Cradle to Cradle. And in that, they give the example of the infinite shower. Now, you or anybody likes a nice warm shower, but that is really bad for the environment, right?
Yeah.
So is the question, stop taking a shower, or take the balti bath, like a bucket bath? Or is the answer that, okay, if we can metaphorically build an infinitely recycled shower that uses solar energy to recycle the water, and that way you can have as long a shower as you want and nobody's really being damaged, right? So I think metaphorically, how do you build an environment like that? And I think that we Without are trying to build that template. So whilst sometimes it's to our detriment, because we pay our manufacturing team and our waste workers really fair wages, which is twice as much as anybody else pays, which is a cost to us, right? It puts us at a competitive disadvantage in the markets we play in today. But I think that there's long-term benefits of this as well, besides it just being the moral right thing to do. So just to answer what you had asked earlier more directly, this is not just like, I'm not an individual action that is going to result in capitalism being reformed. Yes, in the end, big organizations have to take the leap. But then how do you show templates or case studies like, hey, look, this is possible. Why don't we have more organizations doing this? I think it's inevitable, but somebody has to kind of push that arc and push that narrative. So it happens sooner rather than later.
So, how do you I'm really fascinated by this concept of an infinite shower. How do I translate that into other products? So, my questions are two. A, what does sustainability actually mean when someone is going shopping? The second part is, how do I find that version of the product that is that sustainable shower? Like, how do I know if a company is actually sustainable or not?
I mean, that's the big question that everybody asks, right? But I would like to go one step further back, right? If we want to be truly sustainable, if this, the answer is that all of us, 8 billion, 9 billion people, should become monks. If we become monks, all these problems get solved, right? You're not consuming a lot. You're pretty happy because you're meditating. There's no wars. The earth will be fine. But I think realistically, converting 8 billion people, including you and me, to become monks is not realistic, right? So even someone like you, let's say, who is conscious as a Gen Z or just as a privileged Gen Z, that, I want to be more ethical. You're like, no, I'm not going to become a monk. I still like to go out and party. I still like to travel the world. I still want to do these things, but I want to feel less guilty about it, right?
Yeah.
So this again becomes an individual thing. If you really wanted to make a change happen, I think it would require a lot more work, right? You would like to, compromise and sacrifice and become a metaphorical monk, or work on solutions that are pushing the needle. But having said that, what is sustainability? Let me answer that question. I think sustainability will never be perfect, and I think all of us are seeking this perfect answer for sustainability. And I don't think that's what you want to chase, because you're not going to find perfection. I think a really good tell of a truly sustainable brand is when they are honest about what they're not doing very well, because nobody's perfect. So if somebody's claiming that everything they do is green and everything they do is circular, then you have to be like your radar should start beeping, because that is not possible. That's a good way to kind of find out that is somebody being honest, that look, we got these 8 things right, but these 2 things we're still trying to figure out. That's generally a good sign of something that's sustainable. And also in a country like India, sustainability should not be restricted to just environmentally conscious. It should be socially inclusive. It should be ethical. There are certain fair trade certifications that you can look for. Or you can also closely follow what the organization is doing and be like, look, are they being legit? Are they being transparent? Transparency is another good way of kind of keeping it, people really understanding, whether it's truly sustainable or not. If somebody's transparent, good chance that they are actually sustainable. So I think that's a way to find out about sustainability. And remember, it's never going to be perfect, and it should be holistic.
But just it feels like so many things that you have to keep track of, right? Like that before you can just buy a simple product off the shelf, you have to see their full manufacturing system and what goes into it. So is there a simple way to do that? Is there a sustainability index of companies? How can I, at a quick glance, know? Is there such a thing at all?
Yeah, there's some certifications, there's this cradle product certifications that exist. There's also this thing for recycled material. It's called GRS, or Global Recycling Standards, which are the third-party audited certifications. There's some ISO certifications as well. But again, look, there is no simple answer to this. There's a lot of ways to hack those certifications as well. So even if somebody has a certification, sometimes it's hacked, right? So I think there's a short answer is that there's no easy way to do it. It's also the responsibility of a brand, let's say us at Without. We also try to go out of our way to talk about what we're doing and be extremely transparent, right? About, hey, this is all the things that we do well, this is the things we don't do well. So there's, you can look for, so I think there's a little bit of homework that's required. But honestly, I think it's going to become very normalized, where you stop thinking if something's sustainable or not. It'll most likely be. The question is, will it happen 50 years from now, 100 years from now, or 10 years from now, right? And I think that's where we want to make it happen as quickly as possible, because our whole perspective also is that how can a brand be sustainable without compromising on quality, ethics, and on price, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes a no-brainer. It becomes a no-brainer. So you don't have to think like, oh, is it sustainable or not? Like, it's everything is sustainable, or you don't have to pay a premium either, because sometimes a lot of sustainable brands ask for premiums.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, especially in the young professionals kind of space, that is a barrier in not buying something that's sustainable is the price. But something else that I wanted to talk about is that, like, how you market a product, I think, is also so much of whether someone is going to buy it or not. So there's a lot of these terms that people use. And I wanted to ask you about, like, if you could help us break down or decode some of them. The first that I want to start with is, what is greenwashing? I've seen it even on like Without's Instagram and stuff like that. What does it really mean?
So greenwashing basically means that you make claims about sustainability that are not actually sustainable. I'll give you an example that you can see on our Instagram page. That you know, at like, if you go to a fancy coffee shop like a Starbucks, you'll see like the coffee lid has something on it that says compostable. So if somebody like you looks at, or any of us looks at it and said, oh, this is compostable, you feel good about it. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
this is good, it's compostable, I feel great. But when you kind of peel the onion, you realize that it's only industrially compostable. What that means is that it doesn't compost in your soil or in your backyard. It needs to be sent to a special facility where it needs to be heated to 50 degrees Celsius and needs to be under specific conditions of humidity and UV for it to degrade. And even after that, it only degrades to like 70%. So it doesn't fully degrade either. So then now this to me is a bit of greenwashing, right? Where you think that it's compostable, so it's fine, I can just throw this in my backyard. But the truth is a lot more complex. They haven't, quote unquote, superly lied. They're like, oh, it's compostable, it's just industrially compostable. We forgot to put the word industrially. But even if it was industrially compostable as what they said, you probably wouldn't know what industrially compostable means either, right? Because
Yeah.
the normal consumer doesn't know that. So I think that is greenwashing. So how do we get brands to be more ethical? And I also feel like sometimes it's not even the brand is trying to be unethical, right? The brand is listening to what the compostable lid person is saying, right? And then their argument is that, look, this is better than plastic, but because at least it gets composted, at least industrially. The plastic doesn't get composted or recycled. But what happens is that this compostable lid ends up in plastic, and the little plastic that gets recycled, it contaminates those streams as well. So it never ends up in industrial compostable centers. In India, there are like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of these. So like, how can you have an entire country of 1.4 billion people, all of this waste going to 4 or 5 industrial composting centers? So I think, again, like there's nuance to all of this. And again, how do we find, like, how do we get brands to be more educated about this, and how do we get then even manufacturers to be a bit more conscious, right? Because again, the primary incentive is to sell, and compostable sells, because a fancy brand will be like, it's compostable, I'm happy. Whereas they would not understand the nuance of it being industrially compostable, or also, like, the argument about that is that it's probably made from cornstarch, and is it smart to make materials that are disposable from food that we grow? Is that the best use of food? So there's so many layers to this conversation, and I don't expect anyone who is an arm, like a normal citizen, to truly understand this. It's hard, right? But I mean, again, you can try. If a few folks that care can try. But our perspective is that we cannot rely on the individual and the individual's actions, because you'll be able to change 2%, 3% people's behavior, but then the 97% who won't change their behavior kind of ruin it for the rest. So the answer needs to be, how do you come up with better systems? It's, for me, it's like, I'm not mad at the 97%, because I get it. I understand that they have other priorities, but how do you make it foolproof so that everybody does?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that kind of brings me to my next term. And I don't know if there's a difference between these two, but what is the green gap?
Yeah, so interesting, right? So the greenwashing and green gap, I think the way we distinguish between the green gap and greenwashing is that greenwashing is a bit intentional, where a brand knows that they are being, intentionally like, let's just thoda masala lagate, let's just kind of use this to our benefit. With the green gap, what we're trying to say is that it's a bit unintentional, right? The green gap, like, people don't know if they are intentionally being better or worse, right? Like for instance, I think that paper straws, for instance, is I think the green gap, because paper straws, the assumption is that plastic straws are really bad. They are very bad. But the answer is that the answer to plastic straws is not paper straws. I think the answer to plastic straws is no straws, right? Paper straws are probably really bad as well, because first of all, why are we killing trees to make straws? Doesn't make sense. They are a shitty product. Paper
And
straws
yeah,
suck.
that's not a great product
They
either.
suck. Yeah, they suck. Nobody likes a paper straw. So this doesn't make. I mean, to me, that is also a bit of greenwashing. Or look, we switched from. I feel like it's because no, sorry, that is the green gap, because the brand is being like, look, we think we're doing something better, but turns out that the life cycle analysis of producing a straw produces more carbon or takes more water than plastic. And you're like, oh wait, like it was unintentional. They didn't know. I don't think the brand is evil. So I think we think that that's the green gap, which is a lot more subtle, whereas greenwashing is a lot more intentional. But they're similar. They're in the same family.
Got it. And the third term that I wanted you to explain to us is, what is circular manufacturing?
So the very ideal definition of circular economy or circular manufacturing is, let's say use a bottle of water, those plastic bottles of water in weddings now or wherever. It's truly circular if you take the bottle of water, you recycle it back into a bottle of water. So you see, it's like the infinite shower, right? Like you're using that water over and over again. You're using that plastic over and over again. That is what the definition of circular economy is. How can you take the phone that you had, once it's thrown away or once it's like discarded, can it be brought back into a phone, not brought down into like a bench? Like, sometimes they use like plastic bottles to make benches, and that's called downcycling, and it's not as circular. So that's what circular manufacturing is. Also, a circular manufacturing, I'm guessing, is the process of producing something circular. But again, will something be perfectly circular all the time? No. So can it be sometimes, like, we actually prefer spherical, which basically means that you don't just look at environmental circularity. You look at the overall, you look at social parts of it, like, is it being ethically manufactured? So you look at more dimensions than circularity, where circularity is one of the many dimensions you consider. Because the other thing is that something might be very circular, but if it's extremely expensive, no one's going to buy it. So what's the point of producing it? So let's say a straw costs 30 rupees, then nobody's going to buy. I mean, most people are not going to buy a straw if it costs like 1 rupee, right? Or so something that's like 30 times more expensive, nobody's going to buy. Then even if it's circular, it's probably not a good solution. So that's what circular manufacturing is, I think.
Okay.
But I mean, ChatGPT will give you better answers.
No, that's no. The reason that I want to ask you is because I think, as someone who works in the industry and you know all the ins and outs of like how these things actually work, like it was so interesting what you said about the Starbucks cup, that you probably wouldn't even think about the layers that go into what composting means and like which parts of it are or aren't. But one thing that I wanted to ask you is, and one fourth term actually, I wanted to get explained is, what is someone's carbon footprint? Like, because isn't it a combination of both me and how I like am purchasing or consuming, but also how companies do it and governments do it, and from their perspective, what motivates them? They probably want to do what is for profit or what's easier. So, what do you think like the future looks like? In a world where we know we have to focus on sustainability, and how do we work around like this issue of a carbon footprint?
So a carbon footprint, again, there are many issues with this, but they're also like, it's helpful also in some ways. Like, I think everything, every individual, every product, every factory, every animal has a carbon footprint, right? We're all breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. We're all producing, some sort of greenhouse gases. But obviously, certain processes take a lot more energy than other processes. So let's say the production of plastic or production of oil is a very fossil fuel driven. To extract oil from the earth's surface requires a lot of energy. Then it has to be treated at very high temperatures to be able to crack it and process it. So it's very energy intensive. So I think that's carbon footprint is basically the amount of energy that is being used to create something, including individuals. We all have a carbon footprint. No product can have a zero carbon footprint. When they say net zero or where they say it's neutralized, they basically mean that, let's say I produce 10 kgs of carbon, I am neutralizing 10 kilos of carbon by planting 10 trees, right? But you're still producing carbon, right? Like there's nothing that is zero. And the answer is not to get to zero carbon, because that's also not good for the earth. Like, do you know what percentage of the earth is carbon dioxide, or what percentage of the air is carbon dioxide?
No, I do not.
It's 0.04%, right? So it's like really, really small, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have it has a disproportional impact on the earth as well, right? As in, it means that it is much more potent when it comes to blocking the rays of blocking the heat from escaping from the earth's surface, right? So, but again, people don't know that. I mean, everyone talks about carbon dioxide, but people don't know that only such a small portion of the air, but we need that. We need carbon dioxide in the air. It's really important for photosynthesis. The question is, we don't want excessive carbon dioxide. So how do we live a more balanced life? I think that's the answer. So, and even this, I don't think the solution is to stop flying, stop eating, stop having kids, stop. Like, that is not a scalable solution. It's very hard to tell people not to have fun, to put more friction in their lives. I think it's more important to make it to have less friction in their lives. So, like, how do you build an airplane with fuel that is green? So we have hydrogen fuels, hydrogen fuel cells that are being developed right now, which use hydrogen to power things like aircraft, which are a lot greener, right? So that way, again, then flying becomes less bad of an issue, right? Where we're not telling people to stop flying, we're telling people to be like, let's just fly more consciously, I guess, in some ways. So yeah, I think that's the philosophical perspective that I have on carbon, and the fact that it's, again, very complex and nuanced, and we should be looking at things as holistically as possible.
Okay. And my last and final question for you is that do you have one controversial opinion about sustainability, and what would it be?
I think the biggest thing I've changed my mind on one of the biggest things I've changed my mind on over the last 5 years has been about plastic, right? I came into the space being like very anti-plastic. Plastic is the worst thing in the world. But I started realizing that, wait, this is so much more complex than I realized. First of all, plastic serves a lot of things. Like, there are good uses of plastic. Like, this call would not be possible without plastic. Our laptops are made out of plastic, my headphones are made out of plastic, the microphones are made out of plastic, my watch covers, everything's made up of plastic, right? So if you just remove all the plastic in this room, we probably wouldn't be able to have a conversation. Second, I found out that plastic was discovered or created, one of the first uses of plastic was to replace ivory. So basically, it was a very green material in the 1860s because we used to kill elephants and break their tusks and then make plastic, right? And then, plastic, 70% of the volume of a car is plastic, which is much over the years. It used to be made out of metal. Cars are made out of metal, and metal is really heavy. So when you put plastic in, the weight of the car drops, and the carbon footprint of a car reduces because you need less fuel to move forward. Now, this doesn't mean that plastic is amazing. Plastic also has big issues. I think single-use plastic is a big problem. Multi-layer plastic, or anything that's used once and thrown, is not good, right? So I don't know if it's controversial, but I just feel like I wish people can be a bit more balanced about looking at these problems and not be very one-sided, like plastic is bad or plastic is amazing. And also, like, what's very interesting is that, so these narratives of plastic is bad, it also comes a little bit from the West. No offense to them, but it does come a little bit from, like, privilege, right? Privilege, people who are taken care of can worry about the environment and things.
Yeah,
but it turns out
100%.
in a country like India, for waste pickers or people who survive on waste, 50% of their income is made from plastic, right? So it's by selling plastic. So imagine if somebody, like, took 50% of your income away, how would you feel, right? And especially if you were poor. So again, plastic is so much more complex. Again, I don't want to say that plastic is amazing. No, plastic has its issues, but plastic has also good things in it, right? And so how can we be balanced? How can we maximize the good and minimize the bad? Single use anything is bad. So I think that's I don't know if it's controversial, but I think that's my honest take on the complexities around plastic.
No, I 100% think that makes a lot of sense. Because there's so many things that, like the microwave is bad and the refrigerator is bad, but they actually were invented to serve a purpose. And so there's, I guess, good and bad in everything. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Malpani. I think we had a really interesting conversation, and you do great work at Shop Without, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and all the best with what's next.